My name is Eric Morris. I'm the Executive Director of the Morissette Institute for Entrepreneurship, and just delighted to see all of you here. I know many of you, but not all of you, and my hope is when you leave here, you will all be ambassadors for entrepreneurship at Ivy and Western. So it's great to have you with us today. For those who may not know a lot about us, we've got this kind of running film over here that I hope you take a look at. But just a couple of things. We have the largest research faculty in entrepreneurship of any university in Canada. Our academic courses range from ideation and startup all the way through managing high growth. We have experiential programs like our accelerator you're seeing on the board here, business plan competitions, and our upcoming investor event, Western Angel Demo Day, which will be our 6th running of that. We have specialty programs like Quantum Shift, and the BDC's Growth Driver Program, where we've worked with over 1,000 of Canada's best high growth companies. And we really are all about trying to help them get to that next level of growth. Last year, entrepreneurs from Western raised more funding than any other university in Ontario. And as far as we know, any other university in Canada, but we have left a couple out of our research to check, so I can't quite make that claim yet. And it's not just last year, it's really over the past 3 or 4 years. It's a huge number, and it's one of those things that people just don't know about. We get beat up all the time about Waterloo, what they're doing, University of Toronto, what they're doing. In fact, we're well out in front. So again, that's part of the ambassador role that you are all playing from here on. Over the last few years, Western and Ivy entrepreneurs have raised over $4 billion in funding. Last year, we hosted over 100 events across campus and around the country. We will probably be on par to do that many again this year. And they will be for alumni, faculty, students, and staff. We're in the business of helping make great entrepreneurs, and it's vital for Canada's future. It's vital for the future of the global economy as well, and it's really what we're here to talk about today. Pre-COVID, our conversation today would have been about not startups, but how do we make more great companies? How do we grow our Canadian entrepreneurial companies more substantially? But during the economic downturn, it was interesting. We'd always paralleled the US up to 2019 in terms of startups. And in the pandemic, the US saw a huge growth rate in startups and Canada saw a huge decline. And that's a huge problem for us because much of our innovation, much of our employment growth comes from entrepreneurial companies. So the question now has to be, how do we encourage more startups and more great startups? We have to have both of those questions in what we're doing. We know there's a numbers game here. If we don't get enough startups, we won't get enough of those high growth companies. And so one of the things we did with today and all of our different panels is we had a paper competition for our students. And this competition was open to students in any of our programs. So it could have been undergrad, could have been master's, MBA, and so forth. And we had a really great submission from Nicole and Camille. And the way we're going to kick off today is just have them talk about their paper on how we might encourage more startups. And after that, we'll have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions and then bring our panel up and talk about the same thing. So Nicole and Camille, why don't you come on up? All right, floor is yours.
Thank you so much to Ivy for having us here. Having just started HBA1 in September, Camille and I feel incredibly lucky to have been invited, listening to the speakers and all the amazing panelists. So this has just been such an amazing opportunity so far. One of the things we noticed listening to the panelists was a recurring theme that continuously came up was the importance of innovation in businesses. And this kind of led us to the conclusion that startup businesses are, in a way, the lifeblood of Canada's innovation, productivity, employment, and growth. But something we found in our research is that 90% of new businesses actually fail, with insufficient funding accounting for half of these failures. And as Eric mentioned, this led us to the question, how do we drive more successful startups in Canada? And as a result, we came to the conclusion that the answer to this is flow-through shares. As they exist today, flow-through shares allow businesses to pass on or flow through certain eligible expenses to investors for personal tax credits. And while this policy has demonstrated considerable success in encouraging investment, up to this point, the application of flow-through shares in Canada has primarily been limited to industries like mineral and energy exploration. So to boost growth capital for new businesses during stages of infancy, in our paper, we propose an expansion and refinement of current policies, which we dubbed the risk capital flow-through regime. So I guess a lot of the time, new businesses struggle to generate taxable net income because of the very large investments required to actually start a business. So a lot of the time what happens is they end up having a lot of accumulated unused tax savings. And this creates a strong demand for external sources of financing in order to actually sustain this growth. So we decided by passing these tax benefits on to shareholders, this can help provide startups with a valuable alternative capital source that doesn't hinge on early profit generation. And then on the flip side, it also reduces the perceived risk for investors within Canada's startup ecosystem, which would indirectly serve to encourage more investment.
So under this policy, we suggest that eligible businesses should be privately owned and in the initial phases of their growth cycle, specifically under 5 years of age since their establishment, because 70% of businesses actually fail during this time frame. We also think that the investments should have a minimum holding period of 3 years to allow the business to mature, to mitigate risk, and to ensure the investors' commitment to the startup success. We also believe that the startups should provide a transparent plan to investors outlining how the capital will be used to grow the business. So this could include activities aimed at increasing revenue, expanding the customer base, or research and development projects. We also determined that it would be best to keep the policy sector inclusive, so avoid sector targeting and to allow businesses of all industries to apply, because we actually found that targeting specific sectors could discourage innovation across sectors in areas like fintech, and that would allow the policy to remain adaptable to emerging trends. And throughout our research, we also took a look at some comparable initiatives which were extremely successful in other countries. A similar one is the United Kingdom's Seed Enterprise Investment Scheme. And so overall, the appeal of the policy, the risk capital flow-through regime, is that this would be mutually beneficial, these flow-through shares, for both the risk-adverse investor and the startup businesses, but also by boosting the flow of capital into Canada's startup ecosystem, it has the potential to benefit Canada's broader economy in the long term. So thank you very much. That's our proposal.
So we probably have time for a question or two if anybody has a question. One of the things I appreciated on their paper was they really did their research and found other jurisdictions where similar programs were working and made that comparison. Really well done. Okay, with that, I'm going to go ahead and invite the panel on up. And I'll just introduce them as they walk up. So Eric Mickelson will be the first one to jump up here. HBA06, he is the President and Chief Revenue Officer of Stealth Monitoring, Inc., a leading North American video monitoring and security company. Eric is also the co-founder and managing partner of OXO Management LP, one of Canada's first successful search funds. Eric, welcome. Next, we have Nadia Ledak, HBA 20. She's the co-founder of Marlowe, which is aiming to disrupt the feminine hygiene industry with their lubricated tampon. They grew out of Ivy's new venture project, and they've since been in our accelerator, Western Angels Demo Day, and they're just off of the Dragon's Den, where they also got an agreement. So congratulations and welcome, Nadia. Thank you. And lastly, we have Glenn Yanamitsu. Glenn is an MBA 89. He's the managing director of high-impact firms at the BDC. He's a longtime ally of entrepreneurship at Western and has a pulse on what's happening right across Canada with high-growth firms. So welcome to all of you. Really appreciate you being with us today. And we're going to just jump right in. I kind of set the stage in terms of the problem. Not enough startups, not enough great startups. And you can kind of pick either one of those or both of those to run down. But Eric, why don't we start with you? What are some of the solutions that we might be thinking of as in Canada to help us increase our number of good startups?
Yeah, I think Canadians overall have, I live mainly in the US now, and Canadians have been thought to be a little bit more conservative or more risk adverse than, their American counterparts. And so, prior to this, I talked to a couple of Canadian VCs, and the theme, was largely that they're not seeing, entrepreneurs really take, enough big swings. There's more kind of incremental, maybe we can make a tweak here or there to try to improve something. But the big swings were kind of lacking from what they're seeing in some of the pitches.
Yeah.
And then also from my own experience, and Eric, you know this well, but when I went to go raise my own capital in my mid-20s, I was largely told by Canadian investors that I was just too young and inexperienced. And so I just went to the US and got funded there within a couple weeks. And so, it kind of goes on both sides in terms of taking risk, whether you're a founder or entrepreneur or whether you're an investor. So there needs to be more done, within the Canadian market to address that.
Cool. Nadia, what do you think?
I agree.
This is pretty recent for you.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. I think it's a really great point around the funding for entrepreneurs and how a lot of Canadian investors, they want to see so much traction before you actually raise a round. There's a really interesting study around the types of questions that female founders get asked versus male founders. And it was a study that came out of MIT. And it's the idea that female founders get a lot of negative-based questions, they're prevention-based questions, versus male entrepreneurs get a lot of promotion-based questions. So for example, a female founder might be asked, why wouldn't someone just copy your idea? Versus a male founder might be asked, what's your plan to grow this business and outrun the competitors in the next 5 years? So I think in order to see more successful startups in Canada, we have to be more willing to invest at an early stage, to have the right questions so that these entrepreneurs can explain their ambitions, explain their visions, and to encourage a diverse set of entrepreneurs. I know coming out of school, a lot of times it's focused on management consulting or investment banking, and we're lucky that Ivy's starting to invest in all of these entrepreneurial programs for us. And they were a big supporter for us to actually take that step to go into entrepreneurship, but we have to have the right education, resources, and funding so that more people right coming out of school can have the courage to go into entrepreneurship as well.
Thanks, Nadia. Glenn, what's your perspective?
So number one, my hat's off to you for your research, because seed capital, as you've heard here, is a really serious issue here in Canada, but so is growth capital. And there's not enough. The private markets, maybe we're not big enough, and that's why naturally it doesn't occur. So there needs to be some artificial supports. But I actually want to talk about something different. It's about mindset and ambition. And the one thing we've found is Canadians are nice. And we're too nice. So when we have a business in Calgary or Vancouver and it's successful and you want to grow, you say, maybe we'll get to Toronto. Or if you're in Montreal, you think we're going to move into English Canada and we'll go to Toronto. Within an 8-hour drive of Montreal or Toronto, there's like 100 million people to the south. And yet we don't think of that. We think about going east-west. The duties and tariffs and the free trade agreement was signed in 1988. Why are we still thinking that way? The other thing that we find it hard to believe that CETA, the trade agreement with the EU, was signed in 2018. And the last time I checked, which was a month or two ago, Canada's exports to the EU have gone up like $500 million in that time frame. That's the world's largest trading market. We have access to it. It's tariff-free, and we haven't taken advantage of it. So it all comes back to ambition. We need to think bigger. Because Eric's an American, and I always like bugging him about that. But if you have a great idea in California, and you go and get funded in Silicon Valley by some of the different VCs, they don't think we could go right across America. They don't think we could just go to Canada and the US. They think global. And you see that in valuations. We need to encourage more of our entrepreneurs to think big. And that's why whatever the Institute does, I'm a supporter, because I think they're helping broaden everyone's minds and ambition.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. I think, we had a number of papers, and a couple of the other papers did kind of hone in on the consolidation that we have in a lot of industries in Canada. And I always find it's interesting, Glenn, because we have every entrepreneur in Canada has every opportunity to go south, to go to Europe, and we can avoid some of those competitive issues that we do face here in Canada across a number of industries where we have very, very consolidated competition in very large organizations, and it makes it exceedingly difficult to break into some of those. So, but there's a world of opportunities out there. So what do you think are some of the things that we could be doing maybe at the university, but across Canada? So you can pick on me, but I think across Canada as well, to be encouraging more young people to think about startups as a viable career choice as they go out in the world? And Nadia, I'll start with you, and then I'll come this way.
Sure. Big question. I think for me, so my parents immigrated to Canada. They never considered entrepreneurship as a viable career path. They wanted us to be in corporate, to have that stable income, benefits. And so when I told them that I was quitting my stable job at KPMG in management consulting to work full-time on this startup that had no funding, no product, no prototype, they were quite surprised. They were very shocked, actually. And so I think a lot of it is also about giving the entrepreneurs the tools to actually go out and do these things. If there's funding for income stability, support for mental health, it's really challenging to be an entrepreneur. There's a lot of risks that you're taking. How can we support entrepreneurs there? There's a lot of great high school programs like JA Canada and Beta Camp and things that can start to expose young people to entrepreneurship, but it comes from even just our parents and our families who are surrounding us to also feel like we can have that confidence to go into entrepreneurship and to dream big, as Glenn said, to actually achieve some of those goals.
And Eric, it was kind of part of your plan all along, I think, when you came into school. Why was that? And how do we get more people to think that way?
Yeah, I started my first business in at Western and marketing to students, and then decided ultimately that I didn't have the best idea to go out and do it right away. And I did receive quite a bit of support from the school, but I, as my entrepreneurship friends would say, sold my soul to the devil. I became an investment banker in New York first, and did that for a few years before then going to be an entrepreneur again. And so I think teaching people that, being an entrepreneur can happen at any stage in life, and really kind of planting the seed. This is something that we focus on at the Morissette Institute, that you can be an entrepreneur in lots of different types of ways. You don't have to be a founder out of a dorm room in college, but you could go, in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s at any time, and acquire a business and become an entrepreneur, or start something then, right? And so educating people and planting those seeds, I think is something that is a focus and an opportunity for us to do, through that education system at universities like Western.
Yeah, and I have to tell you a little bit of story again on myself and Eric. He's been pushing me for years that we need to be talking about search funds or entrepreneurship through acquisition, which is how he's gotten his start with Stealth. And we finally, and through his roommate, university roommate, ran our first course this year on entrepreneurship through acquisition. It was sold out immediately. We did it kind of as a trial run. We had a huge number of applications and could only take so many to get it started. But it just shows the appetite for different ways into entrepreneurship. And, really, it's an interesting model in that it de-risks a lot of things. So we can talk about that a little bit later as well. Glenn, how about you? Any thoughts on the subject?
Yeah, I believe very strongly in the power of role models. And I think everyone who's been involved in an entrepreneurial venture, I'd like to encourage you to make sure that you hold yourself out as a role model for young entrepreneurs, because, I know the study shows that the children of entrepreneurs are much more likely to think of entrepreneurship as a career than people who work for the man. I think we don't have enough role models in this country, like the Steve Jobs of the world, the Bransons, Larry Ellison. We need to have people that could prove it could be done. And so the younger people can say, I could do that too.
Yeah. Thanks, Glenn. I think it's a really important part. And Nadia, I don't know if you recall some of the mentors you had through MVP and whatnot, but we're always looking. This is a call out to everybody. Always looking for more mentors. And the more programming we do, frankly, the demand goes through the roof. And I think, and I'm going to put the focus back on Nadia in a moment, but I think many of our entrepreneurs coming through would tell you that it's those mentors, those connections, that network that they meet, not only in our formal programs, but the informal programs that make such a difference in their lives and they're thinking about startup. Anything you could share with that? Or?
Yes, definitely. So we started our business out of the Ivy Venture Project. I remember our professors told us to find a problem that we're passionate about solving. And we didn't even realize that is how most great businesses start, but it's truly about finding that gap in that market and that problem you're passionate about. I remember we were sitting down in a breakout room, thinking about different ideas, and the idea of the menstrual health space came up as something we were interested in. It was something that impacted 50% of the population for 1 week every month for 39 years. And yet there's been little to no innovation in the space. We talked about how the branding is so overly feminine, how it's always a woman wearing all white somehow in the commercials on her period. We never understood it. And we talked about the pain of insertion and how tampons are so uncomfortable, yet it's something that we use every single month. And as we started to go through this project, we started to get so excited about what we were building. We thought it was just for the school project. We never thought that this could actually become a business, but it was our EIR, Chris, give him a shout out, that actually told us that we should consider doing something. He said it was a huge market. He could tell how passionate we are. And he said, what better time to go out and start a business than right out of school where, maybe you have a bit of student debt, but your expenses are low. You're not married. You don't have a family that is relying on you for this income. Now's the best time. And I think if we didn't have that mentor in our corner who was encouraging us to take that step, we probably never would have started Marlowe. And not only was he our mentor who encouraged us to take the first step, but he actually wrote us our very first check, him and his dad as well. He believed in us so much and the power of Ivy and the community to give us that first check to get started. And then, of course, the accelerator and demo day and a lot of our first round was actually all tied back to Ivy and the alumni network. So it's proof to show that it works and that if we invest in the entrepreneurs that are coming out of Ivy, it does work and it is successful. So we definitely owe a lot to Chris for giving us that first step as our mentor.
Thanks, Matt. It was great. You don't have to write a check to be a mentor, just saying. But that's a fantastic story. Thanks so much. You've all talked about the funding, and it is we just don't have as much, right? And it's not as specialized. There's more funding to the south of us. One of the things we're working on is Demo Day you're seeing behind us. And it's really two-sided. It's for the entrepreneurs coming out of the Western ecosystem, but it's also for all the investors that we have that have come through Ivy over the past 100 years. Well, some of them may not be still active, but the size of the investment community that comes through Ivy is huge. And what we want to do is give them a format as well to network, to get to know each other. And we're going to do it around the idea of presenting Western opportunities to them. And again, if that's a space that you find yourself in, please let us know. We've had, this will be our 6th demo day, I think, coming up. Each one has gotten better than the last. We only have 80 kind of spots, and we know that within the first couple of days, we sold out 60 of the spots for the one coming up November 29th. So I'm sure we'll be full again on the investment side. We've got some great businesses. Again, please let us know if you're interested. So that's one thing, is try and build an ecosystem here, but it's clearly not enough. And I know Eric and Glenn, you guys have some thoughts on funding, and you had to go south, and maybe talking a little bit about your experience or what maybe are some other things we could be doing here. And then we'll turn it over to some questions from you. So be thinking about questions. Glenn, you want to start?
Oh, you go, man.
And threw him a curveball on this one.
Yes. Yeah. I think there's different engaging the groups of people that are willing to invest. Everyone kind of thinks of the traditional, going to pitch a VC fund. There's actually a lot of people when I talk to different alumni that are willing to invest in different businesses, especially a little bit later stages in their careers once they've accumulated a bit of wealth. They're thinking, okay, this sounds cool. How do I get involved with it? They don't really know how. And so, what I did as a search fund, it's typically you go talk to a bunch of high net worth individuals, maybe a couple funds, and they actually give you money to go find a business and run on their behalf. So these are individuals,
Right.
And they're, typically, call it mid 30s to mid 80s. And so just providing that path to find these alternative means of financing isn't as common in Canada. But I will say it's become a lot more common than when I did it.
Yeah.
When I first tried to pitch it here, I had someone at a very large bank here say, "You sound like a timeshare on an analyst." That's what he told me. I was like, okay, point taken, right? This is the mentality that we had. That I'm not seeing a lot of that anymore. People have heard of these different types of financing models, and they're much more open to at least having the conversations. And I think the Western Angels Demo Day is a great example of that. Just a lot of alumni, a lot of people who want to get involved, who want to at least learn more about it, and now writing more checks, even if they've never done it before.
Yeah. I think we've placed over $6 million with the first 5, which is great. A testament to the teams coming through as well. Glenn, any thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to talk about confidence and how important it is in the whole process. I'd love to tell you I planned it, but we got involved in that industry roll-up like almost 30 years ago. And when we were able to create this company that was the biggest one of its type in North America, I used to think, like, how did I do that? And it was hard to believe, but once you do it once, then the next time it actually makes sense. And confidence is so important to be able to do this. And so how did I get going on this? Well, you need some partners and people that believe in you. And I could tell you the neatest thing is the entrepreneur and CEO I worked with to do the first one, we became business partners, and 2023, we're celebrating our 25th anniversary of our company. And, you know, it all started because there's an older role model or mentor who believed in me, and he was able to bankroll it, and we were able to do it.
Thanks, Glenn. Open it up to any questions of panelists of their experience or any thoughts from all of you on what we could be doing better in Canada to encourage more startups and more great startups. Yeah.
I have a question about entrepreneurs. We talked about age there. Entrepreneurs, let's say, are 35 plus, perhaps even Ivy alumni, that have certain kind of restrictions as it relates to the cost of living environment and engaging full time in leaving their corporate roles to then engage full time to follow the dream. What have you found is the best path forward to be able to materialize the dream when you have this kind of restriction as it relates to the cost of living? Perhaps here, if you could be specific to the GTA.
I don't know if y'all heard the questions. It's tough to start up as you get older. You have more responsibilities, and there's expenses that you have to come up with. That's what I heard. Anyone want to take that, or I will?
I'm going to respond to one part of it. There's been some really cool research done by a place called the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, and they found out that Canadians, their age of their first entrepreneurial venture is 10 to 15 years older than Americans. And so you say, well, okay, Canadians are smarter. You learn off someone else's dime, and then what you do is you apply that, and you have a greater chance of success. So that's one way of looking at it. The way we looked at it is, in America, if you're about 25 years old when you do your first startup, or in Canada, you're between 35 and 40, you have a shorter runway. Because once you pass the age of 50, and I'm looking around the room, there's a few people that have done that. You start thinking more about the exit. You're not willing to take the same risk when you can see the exit. And so therefore you have a shorter runway to grow your business. And that might be okay because we all think Americans are more aggressive and more entrepreneurial than us. But if I told you the stats also showed that in the UK and Australia, they start up younger than we do too, then I think we have a problem. I think we have a problem that we should be encouraging more people to try sooner and earlier. And I love your story about starting it when you could fail and still be okay. But there's more reasons than that to do that early.
When we look at the stats, it's interesting. We find it's, there's reasons to start right out of school. In some ways, there's less risk, right? You don't tend to have families. You don't tend to have some of these other commitments. And so in some ways, it's quite a bit easier. What you miss out on is that experience, that network building that you get from years in industry and really understanding customers and particular problems in a sector that you have with experience. And so there's some real advantages to waiting and starting a little bit later, but then that risk piece comes in. And a lot of different ways to do it. For some businesses, you can test the market to see if customers really want what you're selling on a side hustle until you prove the market, at which time, you're going to have to take some risk to really make it a business that you want it to become. But there's some ways that you can test the waters and reduce your risk set prior to jumping in full time.
The other thing I'd say is some of the most successful startups that I've invested in, people have been working a job while doing, kind of this on the side and testing it, building things. Evenings, weekends, they got kids, they got, all the excuses that you say, I don't have time for this, they figure it out. And it's that kind of perseverance and hard work that's actually pretty compelling to investors. Say, oh, wow, you put this together, over, let's say, a 2-year period while you're working full time, while you're raising a family, while you're doing all this other stuff. Now it's like, okay, well, now I'm willing to if you give me the money, I'm willing to quit that day job and go out there and make it happen. And when I've seen people who have that story, those are some of the most successful companies and entrepreneurs that I've backed personally.
I was going to add too that you'd be surprised what happens when you ask, and everyone's talking about kind of taking that calculated risk. But when I first told KPMG that I wanted to leave to work on my startup, they offered me a leave of absence. They said you can, leave for 6 months, work on it. If it doesn't work out, you can come back after that 6 months. So you would be surprised. Sometimes a lot of companies are willing to offer things like that, offer a sabbatical. Even they said if you want to work part-time, reduce your hours, only work like 4 days a week instead of 5. So sometimes if you just ask, a lot of employers are being more encouraging to this as well.
Cool. Thanks. One more.
Mark Dewey. Mark, 40 years ago, I went to a school to learn about entrepreneurship. There was one professor, Philip Knight. Today, I'm an entrepreneur in residence at Westchester University, Pennsylvania. And one of the criticisms I have of our entrepreneurs, and I'm wondering if it's similar in Canada, is that they have energy, they have the ability to take risk, and many of them fail. And pull the bootstraps up, go again. They call it pivoting, not failure. But one of the things I find is that they lose or lack the intellectual rigor of asking a lot of questions and doing a lot of research prior to going into the foxhole of entrepreneurship kind of thing. And I'm wondering if Canadians might have a bit of an advantage possibly by spending a bit more time in industry and learning how it is that you dig deep prior to throwing everything at it. Recently, I was at the entrepreneurship school at Purdue in West Lafayette, and then one of the companies that we've invested in is there as well. It's pharmaceuticals, and on the laboratory wall, a whiteboard, it said that one day in the library was worth 1,000 hours at the bench. This is also true in my mind for entrepreneurs. They have a tendency to shoot, and then should we aim, where should we aim? Kind of thing. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, get out and spend time with your customers, right? And it's certainly something we teach within the program. They have to do primary research. They have to be out speaking to, 15 plus customers. And I think it's probably true universal. We don't do enough of that. I know the work that I do in programs with the BDC or with the Quantum Shift program that we run, even very seasoned entrepreneurs, as they're seeing new competition come in, the question I always ask them is, when was the last time you went and visited your customer? And you're coming through a pandemic in one way, don't assume your customers are coming through it in the same way. So you need to get out and talk to them, get those touch points. We heard a lot about learning, and I couldn't agree more. It's the entrepreneurs that learn the quickest are usually the most successful. And you have to be always learning about your customer pain points, and your solutions need to evolve accordingly. So I completely agree.
Can I jump in too? Because I took that course too with Russ Knight, and it gave you the belief that you could do it. But going back to what you said about doing the research before you go out to do it, to me, there's a balance. You get equal amounts or maybe even more learning by making a mistake when you're actually doing it and it costs you in the pocketbook. And I think we got to encourage people to just do it too. So I think there's a lot to be said about doing your homework. But man, there's a ton of learning when you're out there and you make a mistake or you do something right. And you learn from that. And I think that's...
We'll throw another prof out there. So if you've ever had Jeffrey Gantz, he would have been the countervailing force there, right? He would have said, look, there's a lot of analysis paralysis, and at some point you got to take action. But, I'm one, let's talk to our customers, but at some point you got to go. Entrepreneurship's about action, for sure.
And definitely...
sorry. I just wanted to add one thing. The way our capital markets are in this country, a lot of times the banks oversecure themselves. But I got to tell you, for me, the biggest revelation was when you have to sign a multi-million-dollar guarantee. And my ex-wife was a school teacher. So you can imagine what kind of risk tolerance she had. I signed it, never told her. And luckily, 15...
This is why there's an X involved, I think.
15 years later, we got the guarantees back. But to this day, she didn't know that I did that. But
It's funny.
Don't tell her if you know her. If anyone knows her, don't tell her.
Yeah, don't tell her. Hey, guys, we've gone a little bit over, but it really is the mission of entrepreneurship at Western and at Ivy to reach out across the country into as many different markets as we can. We have programs like the Founder's Journey. If you have someone in your family or your network that is just thinking about entrepreneurship, I'd encourage you to send them there. 8 faculty members from Ivy took place to put a module together. Each module is with an entrepreneur. We've had 20,000 people across the country go through this program now, and every month another 2,000 go. And I think it's one of the ways that we're reaching out and trying to solve this problem, and we hope that the data will correct quickly. It's really critical to all of us here in Canada, to our quality of life, that we get more startups and more successful startups going. And I want to thank my panel for doing a great job, and our students for fantastic work on their paper. But Eric, Nadia, and Glenn, thanks so much for joining us today. And I have a little gift over there for you as well.
Thanks for having us.
That's fine. Thanks,